We left where we started talking about this log linear distribution of the size of events, log of the size of the events versus log of the number of those events, right? So if we go to Perbach's own original paper, so we go to literature, right? So let's try getting this plot. So he takes 50 by 50, and let's read it from here. What's really going on? It is described here. The clusters are thus defined operationally. In a real physical system, one should perturb the system locally in order to measure the size of a cluster. Figure 2a shows a log-log plot of distribution of cluster sizes for two-dimensional system determined simply by our counting the number of affected sites generated from a seed at one site. So he's not counting the total number of tuplings, he's counting the number of affected sites. Is this clear? Because if you remember, sometimes the avalanche would start, would spread, and come back and visit the original site or something around it one more time, right? But we don't count them. What do we count? Let's see. So I actually did decrease it to 50, just like in the paper, because if you do it with 200, it takes a lot of time. Takes a lot of time. So let's see the code. You remember the tupling function, right? It was just, do you remember this stuff, or did you forget it already? You put a seed, it tuples, it creates children, they create children, etc. Same code. Now I have number of cells in each dimension is 50. So let's look at the paper. It takes the graph, this plot is taken up to 1,000, okay? So let's say my largest size of interest is 1,000. So I create an array of zeros that goes from 0 to 999, let's say, okay? In terms of indices. So then what do? There is an initial run to reach self-organized criticality. So I take, let's say, 100,000 time steps, and I don't count anything. Why I'm doing this? Do you remember how the system was behaving initially? If you remember, at the beginning, when we say every step you take, when we run this, it would be just these small size events. So those initial starting points should not be counted because the system hasn't reached the self-organized critical state. Does it make sense? It's the nucleation of that state. Oops, I did run it one more time, sorry. But then after a while, it reaches the self-organized critical state, at which once it reaches there, it doesn't mean that there are no longer small events, right? There are still very small events, but then there are also big events, and they are connected. So what do? We first run it for 100,000 time steps, and we do nothing. And we assume that after 100,000 steps, it has reached the self-organized criticality. Now we start generating the event size distribution. How do we do that? We keep the tupling function running, but we start, this is wrong. Do you see size of the event is count? So it's different from the paper. The paper is counting the sizes of the avalanches, so it shouldn't be actually the same with the paper, but it seems to be the same with the paper. I will show you in a moment. Size of the event is count, let's say. Then, what are we doing here? Can someone explain me? What is this line doing? These two lines.
Increases.
So we are interested in events between 0 and 1,000, okay? But not the 0 events, of course. Just 1, 2, 3, up to S. So if we have, for example, a size of event being 10, then we add 1 to the S10. So the S vector keeps the count of every size event, right? What do we have next? We have just the log-log plot of S over T. So probability of having that event, probability of having an event of size 1, probability of having an event of size 2, etc. This is plotted in log-log scale, and we get this linear behavior. If we compare it with the paper, it looks very convincing. Do you see the paper has similar behavior? It goes from 10 to the 0 to 10 to the 3, goes from 10 to the minus 1, 10 to the minus 5. We have similar behavior. And the paper finds the slope, it finds it to be minus 0.98. We find it minus 1.03. Fairly close. And I'm tempted to do this one more time with size, not count, but what I mentioned. So how can I change it from size of the event to, I actually wanted to do this. If I sum this up, will it be single sum? Should we check? Just let me do it with just few numbers so it works. So this happened in 1 second. Let me do it for 10,000. Let's see how much time it takes. It might take a few seconds. It might take this much. Okay. Should we look at fitting? Sure, go ahead with the question, yes.
About that graph.
Yeah, this one.
Why at some point it's widens
Yeah.
and there are vertical lines?
Very good question. So this is when we don't have enough trials. Number of trials is not enough, because imagine that the probability of that happening should be around 10 to the minus 5, let's say, but you just running it for 10 to the 4 times. So there's a probability of not hitting that big size event, right? So that's the reason. As with the last homework that you submitted yesterday, with this homework as well, bigger is better, okay? So 14 seconds, 10 times 14 seconds, we can, it will not be exactly 10 times 14, it will be around 5 minutes. While it is running, we can talk about other stuff. Okay, so Perbach realizes this pattern and says that it's important. It's actually we are actually seeing that indeed there is a fractal structure here, right? Because in fractals as well, if you draw log of the, for example, we did this Hausdorff dimension, right? Log of your stick versus log of the log of the points that you are engulfing had a linear regime. We have the same linear regime here, but Perbach doesn't stop there. He just applies this to any field he can think of. Okay, let's continue with this. So, do we understand this one better? This statement? Hopefully we do understand it better. But as I said, Perbach goes on. So, okay, this is not Perbach's study, but it started from that study. It was inspired. So you can apply it to earthquakes. Then another thing that people said about self-organized criticality is that, okay, you can have just take any kind of system that has some sort of conservation. So in this particular system, we have conservation of sand, right? We put another sand, it just topples. Did you follow that? Yes? People said that just take any conserving system, put something, it will topple. So it's due to that conservation somehow. But Perbach said that I can find criticality in systems that doesn't have that property. For example, back in those days, Game of Life was very popular. We will have actually a separate chapter for this cellular automata, but let me show a snippet of it. Are you familiar with Game of Life? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes? So it was a game invented in 1970s. It's a zero-player game. Nobody plays it. It plays itself. So there are some rules, okay? And the rules are inspired by nature. So you can have alive or dead cells. It can be 1 or 0. If you have 0 neighbors or 1 neighbors, in the next run, you die out of boredom. Okay? If you have 2 neighbors, you just stay alive. If you are dead, you are dead. If you are alive, you are alive. I call that stability. Okay? If you have 2 neighbors, stability. If you have 3 neighbors, I call it growth. If you are dead, you become alive. Sort of those 3 neighbors resurrect you. And if you are alive, you stay alive. That's growth. And if there is more than 3 neighbors, then you die of overcrowding. There's too many people around. So this system is very interesting. If you run this, just as I said, there are 0 players here. If you run this, you will get this kind of patterns. I'm tempted to show you something interesting, but I'm not sure if I should. Life in life. Have you seen this before? Okay. This is Game of Life. And it's running right now, but it's arranged in a specific way. It's very interesting. We will come to this Game of Life soon. But at some point, you will see that. So why this Game of Life is interesting? Because it's Turing complete. Yes, he's my exactly Copilot. He just completes my sentences. Do you see what's going on here? this particular arrangement of game of life is simulating game of life. Look at this. At the mega scale, it's game of life all over again. Do you see it? So it's very interesting. It's fun stuff. What Per Bak does with it is he looks at criticality. He just gets, and this paper was published in Nature, by the way. Just game of life stuff. Yes.
What do you mean by Turing complete?
Oh yes. So Turing complete means that you can basically whatever you can compute with game of life. Why? Because you can create logic gates. If you have logic gates, you can compute anything you want. Okay, that's basically it. So why you can create logic gates with game of life? Because it has those propagators that transfer information from one place to another, and they interact in a complicated way. As you might have seen, they can just disappear. They can create another propagator. They can create two propagators, etc. So if you have that kind of so to have a Turing complete system in this context, you need to be between chaos and order. Okay, this will be a recurring theme in today's lecture, being between order and chaos. And in case of self-organized criticality, you are actually self-organized towards that place where you have maximum computation capability. Let me give you this example. Just imagine television static. Imagine a rule that creates a television static, like randomness. Can it compute? Probably not, right? Too much randomness. You want to give an information from here, it just dissipates and gets nowhere. Let's also assume that you have another program, another game that just stops at some point. Okay, runs a few steps, then stops. Can that one do calculation? No. So you have to be somewhere in between. The point Per Bak was making is that I can reach self-organized criticality even in the game of life, which is dissipative. Nothing is necessarily conserved. As you can see from the rules, sometimes a live cell just disappears, right? Sometimes dead cell appears, so there is no such thing. And the way he does it is similar to the sandpile system. He just introduces a new cell, let's say a new alive cell, and sees how long does it take for the activity to stop. So it creates another cell and it starts an activity and it stops at some point. He shows that this system is also critical, but much more. Okay. Now let me talk about this one, computation at the edge of chaos. This is what I just mentioned right now. Here you should learn this name, Chris Langton. So I guess I didn't show you one image when we started with Mandelbrot. Let me see. Did we discuss this image? No, right? It's a big mistake on my side. But I mentioned this image right at the beginning of the lectures, if you remember. So this is something like map of the complexity sciences. How the whole thing that I'm mentioning is connected to each other. Look, these red rectangles are actually chapters in our course. We have Newton, we have Poincaré, we have Bach, we have Mandelbrot here, We have Feigenbaum, which is the next chapter. We are going to have Lorentz chapter, etc. Okay. Then there are these purple ones, which Wolfram is also here. The purple ones, which we mentioned in passing, at least. We talked about von Neumann. We are now talking about John Conway, who invented Game of Life. We talked about Chomsky. We will talk about genetic algorithms, etc. Okay, so I'm sorry that I forgot to show you this. So there is this Chris Langton here, who is interested in artificial life, making life in a computer. And his idea revolves around making systems that are between chaos and order. Are you still with me? Yes? So what he does is he looks at, we just looked at one particular rule and it creates game of life, right? How about you are looking at all kinds of rules that are possible? All kinds of different rules. You just imagine a rule, you see how it behaves. So that's what he did. And then he also defined a parameter lambda that describes basically, speaking a bit vaguely, the probability of having one after one step. So, for example, when it's 0.15, you can see that probability of 1, probability of creating a live cell decreases, so it just stops. Do you see it? I hope you are following. Yes? If you increase lambda, it gets more interesting and more interesting, right? And right around 0.5, right at the middle, it's the maximum interesting amount because you have this different, it's not pure chaos and it's not pure order, it's something in between. So that's what Langton calls computation at the edge of chaos. Okay, if you are close to chaos and order border, you have computation. And once you pass to the chaos part of that border, you no longer have the computation. So you basically have a fixed point, limit cycle, complex behavior, and then chaos. Or static death, dynamic death, and life in between. The point of self-organized criticality is to tune you into this lifelike place in between. Okay? Okay. As I mentioned, Perbach entered into all these kinds of different fields. One of those fields is biology. So let me talk about punctuated equilibrium. If you look at fossil record, you don't see this. You don't see one species gradually transforming into two species. You rather see one species, if you look at it in biological time scales, like millions of years, it's as if it's very constant, and then suddenly two different species appear. So Perbach tried to explain this, okay? And so basically what is interesting here is that events of very big size are probable. They are not probable. Did you follow that? So let me, by the way, I forgot one to mention. Today the lecture is like this. I'm chaotic and you live with it. I forgot to mention one thing about this. All these people come together in an institute Santa Fe Institute, which is still present. They actually built that institute for complexity sciences. So, like Langton talks to Bach talks to Kaufman. I'm aware that it's gone, but don't worry. I'm here. So, what in particular is interesting is Stuart Kaufman. His talk with Bach is very interesting. What is Stuart Kaufman after is the order side. Let me just explain. So we are saying that life is in between order and chaos, right? If we have, so chaos is easy to explain. Second law of thermodynamics. Why do we have order? Right? Why are we here? So that was the fundamental question for Stuart Kaufman. And in fact, he wrote a book called The Origins of Order. Okay, it's a very famous book. So Stuart Kaufman knows a lot of biology, but they work together and can't figure out this punctuated equilibrium stuff. Probably can't make the model simple enough. But then later on, Perbach realizes how to make that model simple enough, and I will explain that model. What is this sound? Maybe it's too hot. So here's the simple model of ecology. There are animals, there are species, and they are connected to each other with some sort of dependence, interdependence. And for the simplicity, we are going to assume that they are only connected to their neighbors. Of course, it could be like this is fish, this is bear, sorry. I don't know how to pronounce it, so let's go with sheep and wolf. They are connected, right? What happens is that if the sheep starts losing its contest against nature, like it stopped being fit enough for the nature, then not only sheep goes away, but also wolf goes away. Right? Nothing to eat. Yes? So we are going to assign fitnesses to every organism. It's between 0 and 1. Let's say this is a very fit organism, this is less fit, etc. We have some numbers here. What Perbach does is the following. Find the least fit organism. Least fit organism, we found it. Don't look at its tears, okay, and take it away, erase it. But also don't look at the tears of its neighbors. Erase them as well. Are you still with me? Yes? So, okay, we erase them. Now what? Just replace them with random numbers. Maybe. And continue this process. Okay? What happens is that if you run this process, I don't have the code for it ready with me. We can try writing it, but we might fail. Should we try? Or I can try writing it during the break. That's less embarrassing, I guess. Okay. But let me tell you what's the point. The point is that every now and then you will have just a single event that is localized. You just erase this animal and then erase something else over here, then you erase something else in different places. But every now and then a very large event happens, like a chain of events that just erases many animals from one place. So that way he describes the punctuated equilibrium, saying that, and this is the paper, punctuated equilibrium and criticality in a simple model of evolution, fitness landscape and whatnot. And then there is this log of events and their sizes, and you see a line. Okay? For some reason, it's very hard to reproduce these results. I'm not trying to say that this is wrong. It's just very hard. It used to be a homework, but we already found a new homework, so I will not give this homework to you. But if you are interested, if you are more on the biology side, you should definitely read this. So Kaufman's name is mentioned here. Okay. Back to my slides. Here's another field where Perbach thought that his model of self-organized criticality could work. It's neuroscience. He created these toy models which would learn, and the system would, as I mentioned, like if you have a critical system, it maximizes learning. Because, look, this is accomplished by a global threshold regulation which allows the system to self-organize into highly susceptible, possibly critical state with low activity and sparse connection between firing neurons. The low activity permits memory in silent areas to be conserved, since only firing neurons are modified when new information is being taught. Like, this is just the beginning of things. The rest was taken up by his student Dante Cialvo. This is a fairly new article. At least it was new when I started teaching this course. Brain organization into resting state networks emerge at criticality on a model of the human connectome. So what is this? They basically have a model of a brain, and they have a tuning parameter. This is not really self-organized criticality because they have a tuning parameter, but let's go with it. They realize that if they tune it to criticality, and I will explain why this is criticality, then the fMRI experiments and their model has correspondence, one-to-one correspondence. If it's below critical state or above critical state, then it's not at criticality. Okay, do you see this plot is very similar to this one, this is very similar to this one, this is very similar to this one, etc. But this is nowhere near to this one, this is nowhere near to this one, etc. Okay? It's actually, there are like big titles in different papers. Every now and then they come out and they say this. Let me take this one down. Large-scale signatures of unconsciousness are consistent with a departure from critical dynamics. So some people claim that if you are conscious, your brain is at a critical state. Do you understand what the critical state mean here? Like, it's not like your brain just stops and every now and then just this one fires. That's order. It's also not the case that everything fires all the time. Something in between. Okay? Consciousness may be the product of carefully balanced chaos. This is fun. Let's read this. This also shows a little bit of the character of Perbach. In 1999, the Danish physicist Perbach proclaimed to a group of neuroscientists that it had taken him only 10 minutes to determine where the field had gone wrong. Perhaps the brain was less complicated than they thought, he said. Perhaps, he said, The brain worked on the same fundamental principle as a simple sand pile, in which avalanches of various sizes help keep the entire system stable overall, a process he dubbed self-organized criticality. Okay. I mean, you can actually imagine a critical brain in a very simple way. Imagine that the brain is supercritical, like chaotic, on a chaotic side. You simply include the synaptic fatigue. Do you know what synapse is? It's the thing between neurons that transfer information, right? If they somehow get tired, which is the case, because the information in the brain maybe starts electrically, but it's transmitted chemically. So there are vesicles that come out of here and gathered on the other side. If you don't have enough neurotransmitters, probably the case with me right now, then you have synaptic fatigue. So the signal just don't go to the other side. So you might have, besides synaptic fatigue, you might have a supercritical brain, but with that tiredness, it keeps you at the critical point. I hope it makes sense. Does it? Okay, let's go all the way to the end of Perbach's book. At some point, he starts talking about traffic jams. Okay, as you can see from his character, everything is now self-organized criticality, including the traffic jams. What's wrong with the traffic jams? Don't you have that? Let me just, without a surprise going away. You always have that feeling that if everyone goes with the same velocity, wouldn't it be cool, right?
It's so fun and games until somebody crashes and you have a 100-car pile-up.
Yes, excellent completion. Thank you very much. Exactly. So, although that seems to you a stable state where everyone is moving with the same velocity, it's highly unstable. Just once stops and everyone crashes, as you mentioned. So he claims that the traffic jams that we have is actually the most efficient system that is dynamically achievable. So like the state where everyone goes with the same velocity, you just can't achieve that state with dynamics. Does it make sense?
It's unstable.
It's unstable. So let's read the last page from his book. Where is it? Let me put myself somewhere here. The critical state with jams of all sizes is the most efficient state. The system has self-organized to the critical state with the highest throughput of cars. If the density were slightly less, the highway would be underutilized. If the density were slightly higher, there would be one big permanent huge jam, absorbing a fraction of the cars. In both cases, the throughput would be less. Okay? More precisely, the critical state is the most efficient state that can actually be reached dynamically. A carefully engineered state where all cars are moving with the same velocity would have higher throughput, but it would be catastrophically unstable. This very efficient state would collapse long before all the cars become organized. Does it make sense? How comes? This gives some food for thought when applied to economics in general. Maybe Greenspan and Marx are wrong. The most robust state for an economy could be the decentralized, self-organized critical state of capitalistic economics with fluctuations of all sizes and durations. The fluctuations of prices and economic activity may be nuisance, in particular if it hits you, but that is the best we can do. The self-organized critical state with all its fluctuations is not the best possible state, but it is the best state that is dynamically achievable. Okay? One concept applied to every field that you can think of. Let's stop here.